this video, I'll be showing you how to add the outer layer of wood to the bottom side of your board using the strip method. At this stage, you should have your full-length strips milled down to 3/16 inch for the bottom and 1/4 inch for the top. To begin gluing the strips to your frame, we'll start with the center strip and work our way outwards. So apply a thin bead of polyurethane glue covering the center spine and outwards on each rib, wide enough to cover your first wood strip. While other glue products work, we found that polyurethane glue is durable, it's waterproof, and it also expands as it dries. So if you don't have a perfect clamping pressure in between your strips and you leave a small gap, the glue will actually fill in that void much better than other options. I definitely recommend using gloves with this stuff though, if you don't want to be scraping glue stains off your hands for about a week. Next, clamp your first strip onto the center spine, checking that it's perfectly centered and straight. To ensure your strip has been properly clamped to your frame, tap on the strip along its length and watch for any bounce. After your glue is dried, you'll need to chisel and scrape off any excess glue squeeze out that's in the way of your next strip. Polyurethane glue is actually a lot easier to let dry and then scrape off when it's hard rather than trying to wipe off the excess squeeze out when it's still wet. And basically, you're going to just continue to add the strips one by one or two at a time if you're comfortable with that until you've covered the entire frame and you have a little bit of overhang around the entire board. Now let's talk specifically about how to clamp down your pieces after you've applied the glue. One of the tricky parts about this step of the process is applying adequate pressure to each strip along the entire length as well as downwards towards the frame. There's many different techniques that can be used to accomplish this, like using standard C-clamps or bar clamps, plastic wrap, tape, elastic tubing, rubber bands, etc. We're going to show you some of those in this video. We've seen people add their strips without a single clamp and only used plastic wrap and duct tape. Also, if this is a new technique for you, we recommend testing your chosen clamping method before using any glue to build some confidence before you start gluing pieces down permanently. One of my favorite techniques for adding my wood strips is using what I call bike tire spring clamps. This involves cutting up a bike tire into 5-inch sections and stretching it over some 99-cent spring clamps in order to create an elastic band clamp that applies really nice pressure from strip to strip. I like this method because it makes adding each strip pretty fast and relatively inexpensive if you don't already have or want to buy longer, more expensive clamps. These bike tire clamps are used to push your strip horizontally to the previous one and can actually be used vertically along your ribs with a scrap piece of wood to help ensure that your strip is making solid contact downwards towards the frame. If using this method, I recommend making at least the number of clamps as you have ribs. So in this 11-foot 8-inch build, that's 18 of these spring clamps. And although it's not necessary, you will save a ton of time if you can make twice that amount so that you can glue down 2 strips at a time. Now, even if you are using this bike tire spring clamp method, it's likely that you're going to need to use another technique in some situations, like when your strip is getting really close to the side rails and the spring clamp won't fit. In that case, and as you'll see in this video, you can use saran wrap or plastic wrap tied around your frame to provide that clamping pressure. The beauty of this technique is that it's very inexpensive, it's very accessible to almost every builder, and it's great because the plastic wrap actually has some elasticity to it, so you can stretch it over your strips and actually bend the wood slightly as needed. So to use this method, simply take an arm's length of plastic wrap and twist it around to make sort of a rope, and then tie it to the rib underneath the spring you're about to add. Then after your glue has been applied to the side of your strip and to the frame, pull that plastic wrap over the width of your strips and tie it off to the opposite rib. I recommend starting with just 1 strip at a time to start, and then once you get into a flow, you can start adding 2 strips at a time, using the plastic wrap to pull inwards on both sides. As I mentioned, this method is really helpful in tight spaces and where there's a little bit more of an aggressive curve or bend in the board, like near the nose of this touring style board. Okay, so those are a couple effective and inexpensive clamping techniques you can try for your build. Of course, if you want to use longer, more traditional clamps, those can definitely come in handy as well. Using whatever technique you prefer, continue adding those strips until you've completely covered your frame. This entire step of the tends to be a little bit more time consuming and tedious, given that there's a lot of repetition and you have to wait for the glue to dry in between each strip. One thing I've learned as a DIYer is it's really helpful to keep a project's momentum going, or you can easily lose motivation to finish, and all of a sudden weeks or months have passed and you haven't made any progress. So for that reason, I thought I'd just share some time management tips to help you plan this step and manage your expectations. You can assume it will take about 20 to 25 minutes to glue and clamp up 2 strips at a time. And then you have to wait between 1 to 2 hours, depending on your glue and workshop temperature you're working in, for that glue to dry and be ready for the next layer of strips. And lastly, you need about 5 minutes to chisel and scrape off the excess dried glue that's in the way of your next strip. Multiply that by the number of strips it'll take you to completely cover the frame, and you can roughly estimate how long this part of the project is going to take. So if you have a full-time job or a lot of competing daytime responsibilities, maybe you only have time for adding a single layer of strips in the morning and then maybe another at night. Another approach, though, which I think is really satisfying and a little bit more effective, is to block off a couple strip laying days on your calendar. Before starting that day, write down a list of errands or other personal tasks that will take about an hour or 2 to complete. So on that day, simply alternate between gluing and clamping your strip down, and then checking off tasks on your list while the glue dries. After a couple of days like that, you'll have the bottom layer done in no time and a lot fewer personal to-dos weighing you down. Anyways, that's just a personal tip from me. So however you go about doing this step of the process, enjoy it, share your progress, and let us know if you need any support.